Well, good morning. Good morning. It's 9 o'clock and we are punctual. So good morning and thank you again for joining us to our Google Hangout sessions. We do this every couple of weeks. We talk about employment matters. I'm Lior Samfiru along here with Lumi Punja.
Hi, good morning.
And thank you very much for joining us on this rather cold morning, but the good news is spring is almost here, guys, so hang in there. And if you haven't joined us before, what we do is we talk about workplace rights. We talk about employment law, things that you need to know if you're working, if you're looking for work, if you have employees, things that impact you. There's so many misconceptions out there when it comes to workplace rights, a lot of misconceptions. You can go on any different websites and you'll find half-truths or complete falsehoods. And we're very big believers in people knowing what their rights are and believing or understanding and knowing what the law is. The law is not complicated, but you need to understand it. So what we're going to do here, as we do every time on a session, we'll pick a topic and discuss it. We're happy to take any questions. Please feel free to ask us whatever questions you have on this topic, or by the way, on another topic. You don't have to limit yourself to the topic we're going to be discussing today. The topic for today, though, is age discrimination. We're going to talk about that idea where someone is mistreated, someone is not treated equally because of their age, whether that be based on their age, whether they're young or old. It doesn't have to be. We often think of age discrimination as something, well, if I'm older, I can be discriminated against. But it can also apply to someone if they're young. Anytime age is a factor, anytime someone is mistreated because of age, that is age discrimination. And it is very common these days. If you've ever read anything about the workforce, you've seen that we have an aging workforce these days. A lot of people are getting up there in age, perhaps closer to retirement, and employers are sometimes struggling with understanding what their legal obligations are and what the legal rights are of these employees. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to try to give you some helpful advice. And by the way, we're going to talk about age discrimination, but a lot of what we're going to say applies to other types of discrimination, perhaps discrimination based on your ethnicity or your race or your marital status, or you maybe have a medical condition. So any kind of discrimination, although I want to make it very clear, oftentimes people think that the word discrimination means someone is treating me differently than they treat someone else. That's not necessarily discrimination. Discrimination is a situation where you're treated differently because of a prohibited ground. So if you're treated differently because your boss likes someone else better, that's not fair, but it's not discrimination. If they like them better because they're younger than you or because of their ethnicity, that's illegal. That is discrimination. So we always want to think of a prohibited ground. And one of these prohibited grounds is age. You cannot be treated differently because of your age. Now, the law here had a very interesting change about 12 years ago, where here in the province of Ontario, mandatory retirement was abolished. And what that means is before it was abolished, we had mandatory retirement, which meant that an employer was able to require an employee to retire at the age of 65. So if an employer had a policy that said retirement at our workplace is 65, that employee would have had to leave at 65 irrespective of what the employee wanted, and that was not discrimination. Okay, there was an exception to this idea of discrimination, and that is mandatory retirement at the age of 65. A lot of employers took advantage of that in the sense that they had these policies, and you essentially had no workers, or very few workers, over the age of 65. Well, that was abolished about 12 years ago, almost 12 years now, where Ontario said, no, we don't want that. If someone wants to work over the age of 65, whether they're 67, 70, 75, that's fine. They can't do that. We can't tell the employer, you have a right to decide for them when they're going to be let go, when they're going to be gone. So the law currently, as it states, is you have a right to work until you decide to stop working. Your employer cannot tell you, we only have people under 65. We have a policy. That's illegal. Now, is it okay for an employer to talk to you about retirement? Yeah, perhaps. And Lumi's going to give you some examples of this. But at the end of the day, any retirement, any resignation is something that the individual has to do voluntarily and unilaterally. So you can't be told you have to resign because of your age. You can't be told you have to retire. If you want to retire, you have to do it voluntarily and unilaterally. Oh, and by the way, you can also change your mind. So maybe it was your plan to retire at 65, and as you got closer, you realized, well, I need to work for a couple more years. I need to still earn some more money. My employer believed that I was going to retire at 65. You can change your mind. And if your employer says, too bad, we're not going to do it, that could then become a wrongful dismissal. It could also be age discrimination. So when it comes to the age of 65, a lot of people still are under the misapprehension that there is still this law that 65 is the retirement age. It's not, and it shouldn't be that belief. It's an old law that was changed now 12 years ago. I had a case recently, by the way, where a very nice lady was thrown a retirement party. She had no idea that she's retiring, but she was throwing a retirement party when she turned 65 because, well, it's 65. Well, clearly that's illegal. You can't do that. So I want you to keep that in mind. Now, moving beyond retirement, we're going to talk to you today about what is age discrimination. We'll give you some examples and explain what the law says is legal and illegal. We're going to then talk what happens if you have been the victim of age discrimination or even other types of discrimination. How do you deal with that? What kind of remedies do you have, and how do you prove it? And finally, we'll give some tips to employers that may have an aging workforce, how to best manage that workforce without breaking the law. With that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Lumi to start talking to us about the law as relates to age discrimination.
And I will just add to something to what you said, that in some instances, age discrimination is combined with discrimination based on disability. So that combo tends to be quite common. Older employees with a disability tend to be treated more unfairly in the workplace, and so that's quite complex. Today we'll try to keep our discussion practical, simple. We'll try to stay away from case law and sophisticated analysis, legal analysis of legal arguments. We'll stick to practical points that everybody can understand, process, and apply to their own circumstances. So in terms of age discrimination, there are overt or direct and less direct forms of discrimination. For example, a rule in the workplace that says that people can be fired when on their 60th anniversary, for example. That's obvious discrimination. It's so like everybody recognizes it, and people tend to stay away from it. At least employers tend to stay away from it, at least in this day and age. It may have happened in the past, but not anymore. Another rather direct form of discrimination would be removing older employees from employer-sponsored medical plans, for example, or stop paying license fees or professional association fees for people who are older or towards the end, what's assumed to be the end of their career. Less overt forms of discrimination would be, for example, a company undergoes restructuring. It affects a lot of people, but the older employees are fired during the restructuring process, whereas younger employees are allowed to transfer between departments. So that is less direct, and but it's illegal to do that. And if the employee can prove that he or she was targeted because of their age, maybe sometimes combined with a disability, for example, it's illegal, and there's a case there. So you can't hire based on age either. You can't, I guess, withhold jobs from people who are older, and sometimes it's difficult to tell someone's age just based on a job application. Clearly, don't put in a job posting that the job is open to new graduates, only as an example. Also, try to stay during the job interview, for example, try to stay away from questions such as, what year did you graduate? Again, those are definitive no-nos, and employers should know better than to ask those types of questions, or any kind of questions where the answer can be linked to someone's age. As we said earlier, you cannot fire someone because of their age, unless there are legitimate reasons that are job related. And like Lior said, the law doesn't like blanket rules. And every time somebody tells you about a rule that has a very clear cutoff point, like the age of 65 or the age of 70, be very wary of that. Again, the law doesn't like blanket rules, but it does allow for exceptions to those rules. So, for example, in terms of firing someone based on age, there are very, I would say, restricted circumstances where, for example, for public safety jobs, I guess a pilot or a school bus driver, in those cases, it's possible to justify, I guess, forcing someone to retire at a certain age, but the reasons have to be legitimate. They have to be objective, and they have to be linked to the job requirements. And again, though that is generally restricted to public safety jobs. Lior, do you want to talk about what employees can do when they're faced with discrimination in the workplace?
Yeah, and you know, it is common. It is certainly still common, unfortunately, and we see this every time, very often, every week, people that have been discriminated against based on age, and it is a very unfortunate thing, and it's very difficult, but it's the reality. So let's talk about what happens there. So first of all, the law is clear. You can't be discriminated against based on age, and the law comes from a statute called the Human Rights Code. So every province, every jurisdiction, including here in Ontario, has a human rights legislation. In Ontario, it's called the Human Rights Code. And the Human Rights Code says you can't do that. You can't be denied benefits. You can't be denied a job. You can't be mistreated or treated differently based on your age. Now, just very important, when we talk about age discrimination, if you're mistreated or treated differently because of your age, it doesn't have to be just because of your age to be discrimination. So even if you're one of the reasons why you didn't get the job or one of the reasons why you were fired was because of your age, it wasn't the only reason, then that's still discrimination. Even if it's just part of the reason, it's still illegal. So if you're let go and they picked few people and one of the considerations was age, that's illegal. So what do you do in that situation? Well, one of the recourses, one of the measures that you have is you can start a human rights complaint. The Human Rights Tribunal in Ontario enforces the Human Rights Code and has the ability to award damages. It has the ability to penalize the employer, and even in some situation has the ability to order the employer to hire the employee back if the employee lost their job because of discrimination, any type of discrimination. So that's one remedy that's available. Another remedy that's available that's usually we see if someone lost their job as a result of discrimination is we can pursue a claim for wrongful dismissal together with a human rights complaint. They're done together. It's more efficient that way. And one of the things to understand and remember is if you're let go when you're older in life, in the normal circumstances, you're actually entitled to more severance than you would if you were younger. Age is one of the main factors that go into deciding how much compensation, how much severance someone gets. So the fact that it's going to be more difficult for you if you're let go at the age of 65 to find a job, more difficult than, let's say, if you were 45, is reflected in the amount of compensation you're going to be owed. So if someone that's 45, if they would have gotten, I'm just going to use an example, 12 months severance, if you're older, you could now be entitled to 16 months severance, for example. So age is a factor in helping individuals with compensation. So there's a remedy at the Human Rights Tribunal. There's a remedy in our courts. The problem with the remedies when it comes to age discrimination is always proving it. The problem is, well, how do I show that I was let go because of my age? How do I show that I didn't get a job because of my age? And you can assume that the person that discriminated against her is not going to put up their hands and say, yes, shucks, I did it. They're not going to say, yes, I did, my bad. So in many cases, it's about circumstances. It's about proving what's more likely. So if you're 65 and you were let go and everyone else in the workplace is 20 years younger, and there's really no reason why you were let go than someone else, you've worked longer, you do a good job, well, it almost looks like you were let go because of your age, and there's almost going to be an assumption at that point that you were let go because of your age, and the employer is going to have to try to disprove it. So that is common. Now, if you're being mistreated in the workplace and you believe it's because of your age, the best way to be able to prove that is to start documenting things. Have a log or a journal where you keep track of what's been happening. So-and-so did this, so-and-so said this. If you want to have a record of something, create that record. Have a journal where you write things contemporaneously. Another way to do that is if someone said things to you and you say, man, I wish there was a record of that. Well, how about sending them an email confirming what was said? We had a discussion today at lunchtime and you told me the following. You've created that record there. Even if they denied, frankly, it's still good to have that. So you want to create those records as best as possible, understanding and assuming that no one's just going to admit that they discriminated against you. If you create those records, that's helpful. In many other situations, it is almost assumed that if you're the one that's older and you're the one that all of a sudden lost your jobs, that there's a reason for that and it's tied to age. Where it gets sometimes more dicey is what happens during the job interview. If I was interviewed by someone and they started asking me questions about their age, or it was clear that they weren't interested when they met me and they realized I was older than they expected, how do we prove that? That's difficult. That is very, very difficult. You would really have to show that the reason why they didn't consider you is because of your age. Maybe there was something in the job or the job description that excluded you. We actually did a case a couple years ago where we represented a lawyer that applied for a job with the company and didn't get it because of age, and we started a human rights complaint. And in fact, the tribunal did find that this person was discriminated against. Now, in that case, we got there were some communications back and forth between him and the company where they were asking some information about his experience, and it was really obvious they were looking at his age. But in many cases, what happens in the job interview is not necessarily going to be known elsewhere, but still, I still don't want anyone to think that there's nothing they could do about it. If you believe you've been discriminated against based on age or any other reason, by the way, you should get some legal advice to understand what your rights are. I had someone do that just the other day when they felt that they were discriminated against in the interview. That wasn't based on age. It was based on the fact that they had a family and they wanted to know, well, are you going to be able to do this job with family commitments? That's also illegal, family status. So there are remedies. The law comes down fairly hard on employers that discriminate, okay? The law doesn't like that, nor should it. So if you've been a victim of discrimination, remember that there's something you can do about it. Now, obviously, we want to have a workplace that's free of discrimination, but employers do have legitimate concerns sometimes with an aging workforce. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Lumi that's going to talk to us a bit about what should an employer do when they want to do things legally, but they still have an issue that has to be addressed.
So the employers need to be able to prove that the measures they take in the workplace, again, are related to the job requirements and not somebody's characteristics. And so, for example, to avoid dicey situations, employers are well advised to, for example, manage performance throughout somebody's tenure, not just when it's considered that somebody's career is coming to an end. Also, performance management should be performed with like for all employees, again, not just those who stand out or because of their age. So I guess consistent performance evaluations and management is key here. And again, you as an employer, you don't want to be put in a position where you have to justify a measure because again, it cannot be objectively linked to a job requirement or instead of a personal characteristic such as age. Job training, again, it can be tricky because again, there are a lot of stereotypes, and so you want to again avoid situations where you offer training. Training involves longer, I guess, commitment on the employee's part. And so as an employer, don't withhold training just because, again, somebody happens to be in their 60s. Link training to objective job requirements and offer it on that basis. Don't make assumptions about somebody's plans or somebody's capabilities without being able to prove that again, the job is required the training is required for job requirements. If an employer is concerned about job safety and the ability of an older employee to perform a job safely, the employer is entitled to get, I guess, a medical note, to request at least a medical note from the employee's doctor. And so that's an option. But again, you need to be able to justify if your request is scrutinized. You need to be able to justify it, and again, tied back to issues of safety, for example, in the workplace. If an employee approaches an employer and expresses, I guess, concerns with their own ability to perform a certain job, and it may or may not have anything to do with age, employers are well advised to offer accommodation options, lateral transfers in different departments, even role changes, but employers should stay away from pay cuts in those situations. Now, I'm gonna bring up something that Lior mentioned at the beginning. Discussions in the workplace about retirement plans. Those are very tricky. Employers should stay away from those discussions unless the employee brings it up. And so retirement is true retirement only if it's initiated by the employee. And anything that is initiated by the employer is basically the same as a termination. It would be a wrongful dismissal or a dismissal that warrants a package and potentially creates exposure for human rights damages. So if retirement plans are, if discussions about retirement plans are open by the employee, that's okay, but an employer should not initiate, should not force, should not suggest that somebody should retire just because of their age. And in very general terms, employers should, because in a workplace there's more than one person involved in hiring, firing, performance management. Training for those managers and employees should be provided in order to avoid liability for age discrimination.
Now, we had a question I'm going to answer. We had a question someone posted about what happens in the job interview or in the interview process if the employer refuses to hire an employee because they're overly qualified. And can that be tied to age discrimination? Well, it depends. Let's talk about a situation where someone is just very, very qualified, maybe more qualified than we want. An employer could have a legitimate concern that because you're so qualified and you have all this experience, you're not going to be happy in this job and you're going to look for other work, another job that challenges you more, maybe that pays you more. So that could be a legitimate consideration and not discrimination. Now, if by overly qualified I mean older, and that's an age thing, not an experience thing, that's illegal completely. So I can tell you, I may have looked at candidates for a position and thinking, okay, I need an entry-level data entry clerk, and this person has been a manager of a team for years. Is this person going to take this job and then leave as soon as they find a management position? Probably. So it's probably not the right fit. That had nothing to do with age. It had to do with experience and me wanting to have someone that's going to be able to stay in this role for a while. So overly qualified is something that an employer could look at, but it cannot be tied to an age. I can't be saying, well, I think you're too old for this job, or I think that you only have 5 years to work, so I don't want to train you only for 5 years. I want to hire someone that's going to be here for at least 10. That would be illegal. That would be discrimination. So again, it does depend. With that in mind, these are our comments today with respect to age discrimination. Again, we can and probably will have at some point other discussions about discrimination more generally. Anytime you're mistreated because prohibited grounds, that's discrimination, that's illegal. And unfortunately, as much as we like to think that those things are really rare, in our experience, they're not. And that is very unfortunate. So if you were ever a victim of discrimination or believe, or you want to understand what your rights are, was this legal, could they do this to me? Give us a call. Let's chat. You can always reach out. I'm going to give you our toll-free number, which is 1-855-821-5900. You can always go to the website, which is stlawyers.ca. Reach out to myself, to Lumi, to any one of our team. We'll be happy to talk to you. And until next time, we'll see you here in a couple of weeks. Thanks, guys.
Bye.